Okay, there it is. Okay, we're on television. My name is Robert Whealey. I'm a historian, and I wear a button around the corner which says, "History can be everything." And I put history in chronological order, unlike Lois, who uses July as a way to play a game with crossword puzzles and just is playing, from my point of view, is not a true historian. Now, she can be a true historian when she taught school, and which she follows a strict chronological order. So anyway, my philosophy is that I discovered who I was by majoring in history late in life. When I first went to college, I didn't know I would be a historian. I was born in Nassau County. My father and mother never went to college, and I was the first of my generation to go to college. And I was lucky to go to college, and I got accepted to my first choice. They told me, well, you can get into Syracuse, you can try Rochester, and Syracuse will be the easiest college to get into as a beginner. But I chose, by accident, Bates College in Lewiston, Maine.
Bob, I think we were going to talk a little bit first about our childhood.
All right, you talk about your childhood.
Before we went to college.
Before I went to college, I was in Baldwin, Long Island.
Okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
All right, and we just saw a picture of the...
Yes, and I said that I was the first of my family to go to college, and I went to Bates College in Lewiston, Maine.
Right, but right now they're showing a picture of Nassau County. Nassau
County is the green one.
Yeah, the light green.
Yes,
light green.
And Suffolk County is the big county on Long Island. And when I was a boy, it was all rural. Mm-hmm. They raised potatoes and ducks, and there was no suburbia out there. And Nassau County, let's show Nassau County again. The North Shore, upon the Long Island Sound, is the home of the upper class.
Theodore Roosevelt had
Theodore
a house.
Roosevelt's home is up there, his
Mm-hmm.
retirement home. And down at the bottom, on the South Shore, is Baldwin and Freeport. And the Long Island Railway was a subsidiary of Penn Station. And this rural area became a commuter town when they put through the electric Long Island Railway. Now, the blue there is Queens County. That was originally a suburbia, and that was part of the New York metropolitan area. So when in 1898, the boroughs of New York were set up. Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. There were 5 boroughs.
Manhattan is the one you haven't mentioned yet.
Manhattan is the center. Well,
Can I say something about Manhattan?
Go ahead.
What I want to say about Manhattan is that I was born on Manhattan Island.
Technically.
No, absolutely. I was born on Manhattan Island.
But you spent most of your life in Nevada.
Okay.
So how long did you stay in Manhattan? 1 year?
No, less than a year.
Less than a year. Okay, so you made your technical point.
Yes, I want to make the point that I was born in Manhattan.
Yes, go ahead.
And I can tell you exactly where.
Okay, fine.
Because I was born on Sutton Place.
Go ahead,
which
fine.
is on the East River.
Okay.
And it's actually just north of where today we have the United Nations.
Fine.
And my parents were living there in 1932 when I was born on June 20th.
Okay. Now
my father went out to Nevada, and my mother joined him then when I was 9 months old. In other words, before I could walk, I left Manhattan and went to Nevada. And we've got a map that shows Nevada, which is where I lived until I came east after college, basically.
Now, I would like
There's
to...
Nevada, and you see that green, there's a big green county there. That big green county is where we lived when I was a baby of 9 months old, all the way down at the very south end of Nye County in Pahrump. The story is that Pa is a Paiute word for water. And so it was Paiute, where the Paiutes lived in Pahrump, that I went to as a baby. And later on, I lived in Tonopah, also in Nye County. My mother actually represented Nye County in the Nevada legislature when I was a small girl, only 4 years old. So, and then later we lived farther north in Mineral County, Hawthorne, where the Naval Ammunition Station was during World War II. And then my parents had a place in Fallon where my brother still lives, right on US 50, which crosses central Nevada at that point. So the map of Nevada shows where I was, and there I am in that sort of blue one that looks like it hooks on to the green one, and then on the northwest side, that's Churchill County, where my brother lives on US 50. And just a little bit over there is Reno in Washoe County, and Lake Tahoe, where I spent many summers as a child. I spent 8 summers in Tahoe City. Lake Tahoe, beautiful spot, wonderful. And later on, I went to church camp, the Episcopal Church Camp Galilee on the Nevada side of Lake Tahoe. So those were my growing up places, which I said I would say something about. Now, you've already begun to tell us about your college experience.
No, I want to say something about Manhattan.
Okay, fine.
Manhattan was bought by the Dutch for $24. The Dutch came to New York long before the Protestants and the 13 colonies.
Long before the 13
Yeah,
colonies.
the 13 colonies, when the United States got its independence, most of them, well, all of it, practically all of them were Protestant. Now, Maryland was made as a Catholic state, named for Queen Mary, Bloody Mary. And the Reformation in England was a very gradual one, and it was very bitter in France and in Germany, where there were long wars, religious wars. Mm-hmm. But the English Reformation and the British Reformation and the British Isles, England, Scotland, Wales, and
Ireland.
Ireland, yeah. Four British Isles were four of the British Isles. Everyone knows St. Patrick, but very few people know that St. David was for Wales, and St. Andrew for the Scots, and St. George for England. That's why.
Right, that's religious history.
That's religious history.
Yes.
And I was more interested in religion, and I saw the connection between religion and history. And this is why I say history can be everything. And you can write religious history, or you can write the history of baseball, you can write the history of Shakespeare literature, you can take any specialty you want and just arrange it in chronological order, and it becomes history. But the PhD in history takes dates very seriously.
Yeah.
Journalists talk about history with metaphors. Now, Jesus spoke in parables. People have eyes and they can't see. They have ears and they can't hear. Well, these parables have been expanded in modern times to metaphors. Now, the Cold War was the most successful metaphor invented in the United States. Who invented metaphor? Cold War, and why has it lasted so long? Now, the Korean War was a real war. It had a beginning date and it had an ending date. And
True, but if there's never been a peace treaty.
Okay, there's been a truce, a ceasefire, but they have not settled a final peace treaty. But the peace treaty is effectively a ceasefire agreement, and the two Koreas are split. Now, there's some talk of trying to reunify Korea, but that's in the future. Right now, there are two Koreas, and as far as we know, that will be a permanent split. I see no opportunity for them to reunite.
Speaking of the Korean War, and since we're talking about our own personal histories, the Korean War broke out in 1950 at a time when I was in college, and you were in college,
yes,
right?
but I was a little bit older, and I understood it a little better than you. I'm 2 years older than you.
Well, just because you're 2 years older doesn't make you necessarily 2 years more, whatever. Anyway.
I think I have clearer memories of my own brain.
Well, that could be. That could be.
So speaking for myself then, I was trying to talk about the Korean War has split Korea, and as far as we know, there are two Koreas, and I see no easy path for reunification. Trump can't reunify them. He is in favor of South Korea, North Korea he has no idea of history. And he is an incompetent real estate dealer who's had no training in the balance of power, in history or philosophy. He is unqualified to be president.
Well, he wouldn't be the first president who didn't know too much history.
No, but, most presidents had a very clear idea of history. When they ran for Congress or they ran for the state legislature, they took dates seriously.
You're pointing out something about Trump which is important, which is that unlike every other president, he has never held political office, any other political office.
That's right. Now, if you want to run as a politician, you have to know the filing dates. You have to know when the next election is going to be, and you know who the opposition is, and you have to develop a campaign strategy. So we have basically in the United States the two-party system. Now, the two-party system has been modified now and then by renegades like the socialists, and they are a third party. They only lasted for 1 or 2 years and they died. Now, the Civil War, we had 4 parties, and that's what led to the Civil War, was the breakup of the old Whig Party and the Democratic Party into 4 different factions. And that the Civil War was the most bitter war that the United States was ever engaged in.
It was also the bloodiest.
The bloodiest, that's it, bitter, bloodiest, okay. Bitter, bloodiest, that's more or less the same thing.
But it is a long time ago, and a lot of time has passed since then, since its dates were 1861 to 65.
Okay, so to get back now to what I want to talk about on Manhattan, the Dutch put up a little wall called Wall Street.
Today it's called Wall Street.
That is the name of the street, which was originally a wooden wall. And they told the Manhattan Indians, you go north of that, get lost. Well, the Manhattan Indians gradually did go north and disappeared. They became extinct. There are no more reservations for the Manhattan Indians. Okay, they merged into the Iroquois and Algonquins, and they were they were a minor tribe. Now, there was a tribe out in Suffolk County, the Algonquin Indians. Well, there's a little reservation out on Suffolk County.
Oh, is there?
Yeah, there is a little Indian reservation. So they survived because it was rural right up to the present time. Well, that's a small tribe that, I don't know, there were thousands of tribes.
The Indians are of special interest to me because there were a lot of Indians in Nevada where I grew up. And I went to school with Indian children. And I taught on an Indian reservation.
Okay.
My first year teaching.
All right.
And in the history of my background, history, the Esopus War was in 1663, and two ancestresses of mine were held during the Esopus War by Esopus Indians who had attacked well, it's very close to present-day Kingston on the Hudson River.
Okay, may I get into this again? Can I speak?
Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your ancestral background. Why don't you do that?
I was born in Freeport, New York, in Nassau County, in the hospital.
Right.
But my real hometown was Baldwin.
Okay.
Now, if the largest, the Long Island Railway has 3 lines: the North Shore Line, the South Shore Line, and the Central Line. And Jamaica was a roundhouse. When you got to Jamaica, there were 4 tracks, and all of the trains, you had to run across the track. And you could jump on the North Shore Line, and most jumped on the South Shore Line. And then there was another line called the Branch Line, a 5th branch. There was a branch line. That's the least known line in Long Island.
This was in Jamaica.
No, the branch line started down toward Long Beach. You've heard of Long Beach, New York?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Well, you got to Long Beach by highway. When you went to Rockville Center, you drove down Long Beach Road, and you came to Long Beach, and they had a boardwalk like Coney Island. But there was no railroad that went from the South Shore. It stopped. The South Shore went, let's give the South Shore Line. They used to say, when they were in Queens County, the conductors used to say, this train stops at Rosedale. Everybody out. You're now entering Long Island. And you went to Valley Stream, Lynbrook, Rockville Center, Baldwin, Freeport, Belmore, Wantor, Seaford, Massapequa Park, and Amityville.
Okay.
When you got to Amityville, you were in Suffolk County.
All right, and you were in Nassau County.
I was in Nassau County.
And you were born in the Freeport Hospital,
right.
But you grew up in Baldwin, and you
Okay.
went to Baldwin schools.
Right, okay.
As a boy.
Yes, that's true. That's exactly what I said. Now, maybe you said it more clearly. Maybe you said it in better English.
No, I'm just trying to recapitulate your childhood there.
All right. I don't recapitulate you, and I wish you would let me speak for myself, if I may.
Well, I thought we were going to start with our childhoods, but I guess we've covered that pretty well. You want to talk about your college now? How about talking about college?
Let's go back to this thing. We talked about the presidents, and then I want to talk about why people choose history. And if you look at this square, some people enter history for military reasons. They're interested in the Civil War. They're interested in the United States Marines. Others enter for political reasons. And that's what people who run for the state legislature or want to run for the Senate, they have to. Now, my father was essentially a petty politician because he became the first postmaster of Baldwin.
Uh-huh.
And he then was a petty politician, and the Baldwin post office was originally part of the patronage. And when George Washington set up the post office department, that was his major source of patronage because he had the power to appoint every postmaster in the United States.
Nowadays we have civil service post offices.
Yes, Nixon changed it to civil service. That's right, Nixon did that. But in those days, it was part of the patronage system. And George Washington used the subsidy to subsidize the county newspapers. That's how the American free press was expanded by the first 6 presidents: Washington, Adams,
Jefferson.
Madison, Monroe. The first 6 presidents believed in the balance of power and had a philosophy and knew history. They read their own philosophy, they didn't go to particularly law schools. They were trained by reading their own books from England, okay? And Abraham Lincoln was educated on the Bible, and he was educated on Shakespeare's literature, and learned to read and write and become a great politician from the grassroots.
I want to pick up on that patronage point which you mentioned. The fact that your father became the postmaster in Baldwin, New York.
As a result of being a veteran of the First World War.
Right.
And my Aunt Lil, okay, let's talk about my family. I had 2 families, the Wright family and the Whealey family. The Wrights were poor, and my Aunt Lil was one of 13 children born in Lynbrook, and they had a 1.5-acre farm with 13 kids on it.
Pretty poor.
Right. Now, the Whealey family were rich.
Relatively.
Relatively rich. My great-grandfather was given a wedding present of 13 acres, free of charge, when they got married. And he was named after Abraham Lincoln.
And he was, actually those 13
Uncle
acres,
Abe was
those 13 acres were later covered by the town of Baldwin, isn't that correct? Aren't they part of the town of Baldwin now?
No, they're part of Nassau County. Baldwin is one village in Nassau County. It's
Yes.
on the South Shore.
Right.
Now, north of Baldwin is Hempstead.
Okay, I was just wondering where those 13 acres were.
Okay. The 13 acres started on the South Shore.
Okay.
All right? Right on the South Shore. And they had a farm in Baldwin, right?
Well, that's what I was thinking, that eventually those 13 acres were covered by part of the town of Baldwin.
Baldwin was a village.
Yeah.
Nassau County, there were 3 townships. Okay? There was North Hempstead, Hempstead Township, that's the big one, that ran from the city of Hempstead down to the South Shore.
And the family cemetery is in that area, isn't
The
it?
family cemetery is in Hempstead, right on, no, it's on the border of Hempstead and Baldwin.
Okay.
Now, if you take the main street of Hempstead and you go due south, it's called Baldwin Road. And then it becomes the Southern State Parkway, and it's called Grand Avenue. And Baldwin Avenue then, I mean, Hempstead, when you drive south. There's no railroad south. You just drive south in a bus or your car, and you come to Main Street. Hempstead becomes Baldwin Road, and Baldwin Road runs right into the town of Baldwin and goes right into the bay and the ocean.
Ah.
Okay?
So you were near, did you ever go sailing as a boy?
Yes. We won't get into sailing. That's off the subject. Okay? I want to talk about relevant history that led me to get a PhD, and I want to talk about why history is everything and why a PhD. I wrote a unique book, Spain and the Spanish Civil War, and that was a very hard thesis and a very original thesis to publish.
Yeah, it's called Hitler in Spain.
That's right. And since it had Hitler in the title, it became unique, very original, because the German historians didn't know anything about Spanish, and the Spanish historians didn't know anything about German, and it was hard for me to get that combination as directors of the PhD. So that when Lyle McGew got his PhD, he had his PhD from Lynn Case, and Lyle McGew became an inner-directed historian who Case had all of his students do French history. Okay? That's what you call an empire. Now, John Gaddis has an empire. John Gaddis tells his students, all right, you're going to do books on the Cold War. You're going to do Carter's policy. You're going to do Jimmy Carter. He went through all the presidents. Okay, so John Gaddis was a empire builder, and he wrote his book, the biography of George F. Kennan. That was his great book.
Right. Kennan was an important diplomat.
And he directed historians, but John Gaddis told his students, well, you're going to do America and China, or you're going to do America and Latin America. And the Latin Americans, they had most of the application, and he assigned them topics. So you could get a PhD from Gaddis, but he picked the topic.
All right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Well,
that's what I call an empire builder.
Well, yes, and you've been talking about university politics,
That's
so
right.
to speak,
That's
and so
right,
on,
right.
which is an important kind of politics, and I suppose every career has certain political aspects to it. Let me change the subject.
You've changed it many times.
Well, I think that it is my turn to speak. It is my turn to speak about my history background.
We've heard you a long hours.
Yes, you've heard us, but not on tape. Okay. So I want to say something about my own historical background.
Go
please.
ahead.
Okay. Well,
have a
I
sense of
was
humor.
always pretty interested in history. As a matter of fact, I remember quite well when I first realized about history, because there was a poster-like thing that told about a woman who was looking back on her life. She was a woman in her 90s, but she could remember being a little girl back in the day when gold was discovered in California, okay? And then it was the first time I really realized that people had these backgrounds that were so different from the things that I knew and remembered, because they had lived in a different time, in a different place. They had different parents and ancestors and so on. And so I realized that there was a lot of history out there for people to be interested in. And we did have, I suppose you had, Did you have New York State history in your grade school when you were a boy?
Yes.
Well, we had Nevada history in
Every
my
state
grade
has a
school.
state history. When you go to Ohio, you have Ohio history.
That's right.
That was put through by the School of Education because the elementary school teachers had to know the history of their own state. And when you went to Delaware, you had Delaware history.
Right.
So I had Delaware history because I moved around to many states.
Uh-huh. Well, you moved from New York, from Nassau County,
To Lewiston, Maine.
Lewiston, Maine, to college.
That's right. And I only stayed there 2 years. I left Lewiston because I decided I would go to dental school.
Uh-huh.
I met hitchhiking.
Right.
And he said to me, "Oh, you don't want to be a chemist. You just sit in some laboratory and work for some big industry. If you get into dentistry, you have your own business. You have your own car. You're your own boss. I got a big car here. And I saw your Bates bag, and I left Bates after 2 years because I was brilliant, and I got accepted to dental school." And I said, "If you're as good as you say you are, you can get accepted with only 2 years of college."
So that's what you did.
But I was in the 90 percentile. Most people who entered dental school had to have 4 years in order to get in.
Uh-huh.
But they took a few exceptional students at the University of Pennsylvania. So I had a good memory, and I was good on my facts in chemistry, biology, and so forth and so on. And I got all A's on my science.
Yes, but you weren't, someone said, "Are you really that interested in teeth?" You were talking about politics all the time.
I learned from my elders. I learned by talking like my father. It's not it's not what you know, it's who you know. And when I went to college, I learned from, first of all, I learned from Richard Carlson, whose
That was
father,
your friend.
Dudley, was far more educated than my father. My father had to drop out of school when he was 13 and had to sell teacups. And then he got a job in automobile mechanics and so forth, and made a great deal of money before the First World War, and was drafted at the age of 23. That was unique. He was drafted when he had his own business.
But he had a high draft number, so he got drafted.
Well, he had a high draft number because he was unmarried, and he was, why was this old man unmarried?
Well, 23, not that old, but relatively speaking,
Right.
compared to the 18-year-olds.
Right, and he was in Long Island City, right where the draft board was, and they said, you're gonna show up here tomorrow morning. And my father slammed the door. The hell I'm not. And
he ran away.
He ran away. He ran away to Philadelphia.
Well, he was lucky he wasn't prosecuted as
Well,
a
I'll
draft
tell you how
dodger.
he was caught. He went down to Philadelphia. He had savings. He never drank alcohol. He saved all of his money. He was a penny pincher. And he went from selling teacups to selling automobile parts, and made a great deal of money in Long Island City by becoming an expert on truck parts. Now, when they first began manufacturing trucks, the Mack truck, the white truck, the international truck, they never thought of parts. They were amateurs. So they threw all of the parts on a big garage floor, and they would have a telephone. Oh, here's a guy who wants a universal joint from the auto car. Go out there, Whealey, and find it. And he would do all of his business by telephone. And they would deliver the part, see? So that's how my father was a salesman. And he became a salesman of parts and became but he was not a mechanic, okay? He knew what the parts looked like. And he made a great deal of money. Well, anyway, he had savings in the bank. And he was in partnership with a German by the name of Hermann Ernst. And they had a business selling sawdust from the mahogany plant in Astoria to smoke hams. And it was just like a 5-mile ride. They had a contract to deliver all of the mahogany sawdust where they smoked the hams, and they made Virginia hams by that smoke, see?
Right. Well, you have such a memory that you not only remember what happened to you, but you remember what happened to your father.
That's right. He made
Now-
a big impact on
Now,
me. Yes.
let me mention that I had quite a big impact on me by my mother.
That's right.
And
We've heard.
I mentioned before that
Okay.
she had been in the state legislature in Nevada.
Right. And she was better educated than my father.
Yes, she finished at the University of California, Berkeley
Yes, that's right.
in 1923
Right.
in English.
Right.
And and then later she taught school.
Right.
She was a businesswoman. She was a farmer. She was a very
Well, she became a
talented
business.
person.
She became a business after she taught school for a while.
well.
How long did she teach
yeah.
school?
She taught school in various times. She was, in fact, in 1934, she went to summer school
Okay.
in order to get the necessary courses
Right.
to teach.
Right.
And she taught at Pahrump, which I mentioned earlier, that
Right.
we'd gone out there
That was
when
the
I
Depression.
was 9 months.
They survived
when
the
I was
Depression.
9 months.
Right. As the sheep herders.
And they had sheep,
But
among
they were
other
not farmers.
things.
Sheep died. They
Well-
didn't have an experience in it.
They did have a bad problem with the sheep because the sheep were delivered to Death Valley Junction.
Right.
And that was about 30 or 40 miles from Pahrump.
Okay.
They didn't have a dog.
All right.
You
Well, that's
know.
one of the accidents of history.
That's one of the accidents of history.
Okay.
They didn't make it back with many sheep to Pahrump in that day.
All right.
Which I personally can't remember, but I had been told about that history by my mother.
Right.
Yeah. But she was a successful businesswoman. She sold insurance later on, among other things. She worked for the Federal Employment Service when I was a young girl, and we lived in Nye County in Tonopah. And she was a successful farm girl, as she'd been raised on a farm, knew how to milk a cow and all that sort of thing, so that when they bought a farm in the 1940s, she was able to do the farm work. She learned how to do we had to get water out on that territory
Okay.
in Nevada.
Now, can I get back to what I would like to talk about?
Well, I think that it is my turn for a little bit. But we are supposedly talking about our lives, Bob. We're supposedly talking something about our history.
How many minutes have you been talking? How many minutes have you allowed me?
Well, you've done most of the talking, which you will notice when this show plays, if it ever plays.
Okay.
We were talking about your college experience. You went to Bates College. You went to dental
That's
school.
review. We've said that. I'm
University
finished
of
with that point.
Pennsylvania.
I'm finished.
Then you finished at the University of Delaware,
All
and
right.
then you went to the University of Michigan, which is where we met.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
you sped over a lot of history. I want to go over a little slower.
Oh, now, just a minute, please. Okay. You're 88, right?
Right.
I'm 86.
Right.
There's been a lot of years between now and when we were in undergraduate school. I went to Stanford, and then, as I just mentioned, we met as graduate students at the University of Michigan, and that was in 1954, and that is over 60 years ago, because we've been married for 64
I agree with
years.
that date. I agree with that date.
Okay.
Only you've said it too fast for me. I would like to go over that ground a little slower. And what I would like to do is make a new question. And I think I tried to do this. Why do people enter history? And I said some military.
Yes, you've mentioned that.
And some politics.
Yes.
And this is where I was. and economics trump.
Yeah.
And then over here is what needs to be explained a little more. These are all of the controversial subjects: philosophy, ideology, nationalism, communism, fascism, Stalinism. This is the other side of this button of why some people put philosophy first, but I put history first.
Right.
And they are universal subjects which speak to everything. Now, the history of chemistry is very interested for those who go on and become chemists, and so, but that's a very narrow discipline. But historians and philosophers tend to be universal. And I say, well, the answer is that every historian should take at least one history course. Every philosopher should take one history course, and every historian should take one philosophy course. And I took Voltaire, okay? And I read a biography of Voltaire. And Voltaire then...
Was that in college?
I'm not going to tell you the date I read Voltaire. That's not my interest in talking. I'm talking about... I don't know why you like to interrupt. When I read Voltaire
Yes.
is not in my mind now, and I don't have a note when I read Voltaire.
Okay. Well, I thought that you were going to say a little bit more.
What I wanted to
about
say
Voltaire.
was, I wanted to expand on this a little bit, and I finally got it through, that this is the difference between my philosophy and why people enter. Now, I think we finished that topic. Now I would like to interest a new topic. I want to talk about a book written by David Riesman called The God That Failed.
No, David Riesman wrote The Lonely Crowd.
David Riesman.
He might have written a chapter in The God That Failed.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Anyway, the book is called The Lonely Crowd.
His main book is called The Lonely Crowd,
Right.
yes.
And this was a summary, which is not particularly accurate. Anyway, he was an American historical sociologist, and he divided American character into three types. A, the inner directed. 2, the outer directed, and 3, the other directed. And I think that I was primarily inner directed. But compared to Gaddis and compared to Lyle McGue, I experimented in other directed, and this show here is other directed, doing TV, okay? And as I say, Gaddis and Lyle McGue stuck to one subject and finished it and became part of an empire, okay? So I experimented in three kinds of history. Now, I think that we can rate people as being, and I would rate you primarily as a other-directed person. You've written 3 MAs, and we're both outer-directed. That's religious values. You have religious values. Okay? So that's all I wanted to say, is that there are 3 different character types. So I guess that's all I'd like to say about that. But I think we could rate other historians. We could ask ourselves, getting back to this, I selected these historians to do about viable civilizations. This is the other side here. This is chapter 7. We need to get a complete text of this.
Well, it looks like chapter 7 talks about various
This is This is my
historians who were interested in civilizations. You mentioned H.G. Wells, Oswald Spengler, Arnold Toynbee,
Will Durant,
Samuel Huntington.
Right, yeah. This is this side of the button that every historian should talk about the civilization. So
I heard Toynbee speak,
so did I.
but not in the same spot.
No, I heard him in England. Okay.
Yeah, you heard him in England.
Right.
I heard him at Stanford.
Good. All right. Anyway, the definition of civilization, chapter 11, Jewish civilization, Christian civilization, Western civilization, which is a kind of a French idea of uniting them. Now, Islamic civilization is alien. Hindu civilization is very alien. And Buddhist is a reform of Hindu. And then there's Chinese civilization. So there are 7 civilizations, viable civilizations today. That's my philosophy, understanding.
And as a historian, as a professional historian and professor, you taught the history of Western civilization at one point.
That's right. Now, Gaddis was an American historian.
And he's particularly interested in diplomacy.
He's interested in the diplomatic history of the United States.
Right.
But he does not have much sympathy for Western civilization. The people who want to become a minister or a theologian take Western civilization, because that leads to the Bible and Christianity and religion. Now, this book here is the story of religion.
Mm-hmm.
This book was written by a Unitarian, Charles Francis Potter.
Mm-hmm.
And this book was read by my father.
Mm-hmm.
And he picked it up from a friend of his by the name of Joe de Rosa, who was a Portuguese. And this is how my father understood Catholicism. Joe de Rosa's mother worked up near Gloucester, Massachusetts, up near where they have a lot of Portuguese settled to cut fish. And they did the labor of the fish business. They used to fillet cod and sell clams and so forth and so on. Well, anyway, Joe de Rosa's mother was a washwoman and saved all of her money and got him to go to theology school. And she wanted him to become a priest. Just before he was going to take the inauguration, he resigned. He said, I can't go through with this. It's a fraud. I don't believe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a lot of lapsed Catholics. There are lapsed people from other religions as well.
He said the purpose of the Vatican is to keep the people ignorant. They spoke in Latin. Nobody understood Latin.
Well, they've changed that, haven't they?
They changed that. This was in Joe de Rosa's day.
Yeah, right.
The papacy has liberalized itself.
Yes.
But this is under...
Things have changed a lot.
Yeah, this is under Pope Pius XI, Pope Pius XII. These were the popes that got involved in World War I, World War II, and so forth and so on. Okay. Now, John Kennedy was fortunate in that these popes died, and we had a new radical pope, John the 23rd, who was the most radical pope in 500 years. Just taking the name John the 23rd was a radical decision. Mm-hmm. Because there was a dispute a long time ago in the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. And there was already a John the 23rd. So they just reputed them, and that's how John Kennedy was able to convince the Protestants to accept the fact that his advisors all went to Harvard and were Unitarians, and you wouldn't hold that against him. And that's how John Kennedy got elected.
Well, that might have been a factor, yes.
That was a good politician.
Yeah.
So anyway, what I want to say about this story of religion is that it has a point of view in the index.
Well,
I want to talk about these. This is the story of religion. This is world religions, you see.
oh, yeah. So those go
Right.
over the ones that you mentioned before.
No, I haven't talked about Akhenaten or Moses
Oh,
or
these are famous.
Yes, this is what I
religious.
want to talk about. Okay, now they have dates.
Oh, yeah.
Akhenaten was an Egyptian, and he reigned from. You read the dates there. What are the dates?
Well, it was about 1200 BC.
No, it says 1388. I could read it with my magnifying glass.
Right. Well, I said it was about 1200
All right, I want to give exact dates.
BC.
I want to give exact dates.
BC.
1388 to 1358 BC. And he calls this the first individual in history. Now, that's an interpretation. And then he has Moses. Now, he just has the 13th century. And Moses,
BC.
BC, but there were no specific dates. He was not the lawgiver. That was an invention. Moses was an escaped slave from Pharaoh Empire. And he then fled from
He was a Jew.
well, this is before the word Jew was invented.
Well, that might be, but certainly that's what we learned in our
All right,
Bible
I'm saying
studies. isn't it?
this is his interpretation. Now, you can give your interpretation at another date, and we can debate that. But he says that Moses discovered the personality of God. I would say that Moses discovered monotheism. I would change that. Now, Zoroaster was from 600 to 683 BC. Who discovered the devil? That's where Satan comes from.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you notice that when the Iranians came back, the recent wars, they used to say the United States was the great Satan. Okay, that's right now. When the United States got involved in the Middle East. Okay,
Well, Satan is the devil.
that's right, right. But that's where the name Satan came from. Then he has one Jewish prophet called the greatest Hebrew prophet, and he has exact dates. This is when the Bible gets to be more serious. The early Bible is very vague
Yeah.
on the dates. Okay, so Jeremiah was from 650 to 675 BC, and he says he's the greatest Hebrew prophet. Well, there are many Jews who say Isaiah is a better Hebrew prophet, but he just leaves that out. That's an arbitrary decision. Then we have Buddha.
Okay, so that's a different territory of the world.
Yes, that's what the story of religion is. He's talking
Yeah.
about world religions. Now, Buddha, who founded salvation in psychology. Well, that's a kind of an invention. Most Buddhists would say there are two Buddhists, the mainstream, the greater vehicle, and the lesser vehicle. And the greater vehicle was that Buddha was an atheist who said there was no God. And the lesser vehicle said, well, he had all kinds of monks worshiping him, and he was worshipped as if he were a god, see? So the word Buddha is the enlightened one. Anyway, he said he found salvation in psychology. Well, I would say Buddha found salvation through contemplation, sitting under a tree. Oh, we only got 2 minutes left. Well, we have to end this. Anyway, he has a chapter on Jesus, chapter on Paul, and then he has American religions. And here's one of the interesting things. The most original, this is your interest in feminism, was Mary Baker Eddy.
Founder of Christian Science.
Right. And she had, I went to a Christian Science ceremony. They had two pulpits. The gospel according to the Bible, the gospel according to Mary Baker Eddy.
Mm-hmm.
And the journalist here in Athens that we met, who was the journalist?
I don't know.
Who was the head of the Athens Messenger? He was a Christian Scientist.
Oh yes, you're talking about
They closed
the
it
family.
down. They had a Christian Science reading room.
Yeah.
And Christianity, Christian Science lost its power in the 60s. But it was very, very popular in the 1920s,
Yeah.
30s, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, we have to end that with.
Right.
We haven't quite finished this.
We've gone sort of back and forth here. I'm not too sure how much we talked about our own personal
Well.
histories,
All right.
but we certainly got a lot of Bob's ideas out here. And so this is Lois Whealey and my husband, Robert Whealey. And it's interesting to be on your program, Bob.
Thank you very much.
And we know that Bob's program is likely to emphasize Bob, which it definitely has. So good luck to everyone out there. Have a happy July, folks.